Story 1. A table for sale, but you'll pay a price. One day, as I was browsing through Craigslist, I stumbled upon a listing for a really cute vintage table that would fit perfectly in my tiny, somewhat retro-looking apartment. The description said it was in great condition, and the price? It was a steal. Not wanting to waste any time, I quickly contacted the seller. "I've had some interest in it," the seller said, "but if you can get here in the next few hours, it's yours." "I'm going to go pick it up," I told my roommate. "Will you come with me so that I don't have to go alone?" My roommate looked at me with disappointment on her face. "I can't. I've got to leave for work in a few minutes," she said. "But it's really unsafe to be going to a stranger's house all alone. You shouldn't do it." I thought about the table and how cute it was. I really wanted it, and the seller told me that there were others interested in it. So, despite my roommate's warning, I messaged the seller. "Yes, I can be there shortly." Placing the address into the GPS, it looked to be in a safe neighborhood. It wasn't a neighborhood that I was overly familiar with, but I believed it to be a safe area nonetheless. I would soon discover just how wrong I was. I remember feeling my stomach sink as I approached the house. It was super sketchy, with its peeling paint, overgrown yard, and a general aura of neglect. My gut was sending warning signals, but then I thought about the table and how it would look in my living room. "I'm already here," I told myself. "Let's just get it done and get out of here." I exited the car, keeping my head on a swivel as I approached the front door. As I slowly pressed the doorbell, my sixth sense seemed to be screaming at me to turn around. When the door opened, I was hit with another wave of apprehension. The man inside was a mess. He had unkempt hair, stained clothing, and an unsettling grin that didn't quite reach his eyes. His voice was unnervingly friendly as he said, "Oh, you're here for the table, right? It's inside. Come on in." He said this as he looked around behind me, as if to check to see if I were alone. Every alarm bell in my head started ringing. The interior of the house was dimly lit, and what I could see was in disarray. Something was seriously off. I found myself stepping back, stuttering something about having forgotten my wallet at home. The urgency in his voice as he tried to convince me to come inside only heightened my fear. "It's fine, dear," he said. "Come on in. You've got nothing to worry about. You're going to need my help carrying this out to your SUV." There was something so sinister about the entire situation. The look in his eyes, and the way he smiled, it was like a wolf in sheep's clothing. Finally, the alarm bells were too loud. I turned on my heels and sprinted to my car. My heart was slamming against my ribcage. As I fumbled with my keys, his muffled calls followed me, but I didn't dare to glance back until I was safely inside my vehicle, doors locked. He stood at the doorway yelling, like it was a threshold he couldn't cross, like he didn't want to be seen in the open. I hit the ignition and drove away as fast as I could. When I was at a safe distance, I pulled over. My entire body was shaking from the adrenaline. I finally gathered myself and returned to my apartment. There, I took a cold shower, as if trying to cleanse myself of the entire experience. Later that night, my roommate returned, and I recounted the entire ordeal to her. She scolded me, as she had every right to do. "I told you," she said. "Something terrible could have happened to you." A few days later, I was mindlessly watching the news only to be jolted upright by a familiar image. There he was, the creepy guy being arrested for several crimes he'd committed using that abandoned house as a base. The report said he was a squatter and had been luring people there through online marketplaces with various scams and potentially dangerous intents. I felt sick and shaky, thinking of what could have happened if I'd ignored my instincts and stepped inside. I reported my interaction with him to the police, including the messages and the online account he used. That experience was a sobering lesson in trusting my intuition over a seemingly good deal. I didn't get the table, but I was lucky enough to escape a possibly dangerous situation. Now, safety trumps everything else, and no piece of furniture, no matter how perfect, will ever change that again.
Story 2. Come Get It. One day, I ran across a Craigslist ad that seemed like a golden opportunity for someone like me, a DIY enthusiast always on the hunt for some free materials to use in my weekend projects. Free building materials. First come, first serve, it read. Simple, straightforward, and exactly what I needed for my upcoming deck repair. I messaged the seller, and they replied back quickly with 3 words, "Come get it," and the address. I quickly gathered some tools, hopped into my truck, and set the GPS for the destination. As I approached the address, I instantly started getting a bad feeling. The place was visibly run down. Buildings looked beat up, windows smashed in, and the whole area just gave off a creepy vibe. But there in front of me was the warehouse, looking just as worn as everything else. A tiny voice in my head said this might not be a good idea, but free stuff has a certain allure, you know? I pulled up and stepped inside. It was dimly lit, but the old building supplies were there, just as advertised. I remember the light barely squeezing through the dirty windows, but it was a decent enough haul if you weren't too picky. I yelled out, "Yo, anybody here?" Nothing. "Hello?" I yelled out a little louder. Again, nothing. I'm the type of person who usually goes ahead and does something and begs for forgiveness later, rather than waiting for a definite yes or no before I take action. So with that in mind, I went ahead and just started gathering up planks. While I was working away, I heard a weird noise after a bit, like a faint shuffling sound. Quite frankly, it gave me the chills, but I chalked it up to being in an old, creaky building and kept going, trying to ignore the uneasy voice in my head that something was definitely off. Then, clear as day, I heard a voice. My blood ran cold when footsteps started coming my way from the deeper, darker part of the warehouse. I turned around, and this guy, looking rough and unhinged, stepped into the little light there was. This damn man was holding a machete, I kid you not. I didn't know if this was some type of sick prank or if some guy was just out of his mind and had nothing better to do than try to lure a stranger in to have some fun with. Either way, I wasn't going to stick around to find out. I dropped everything and bolted towards the door, and I swear I felt him right behind me. When I got to the truck, I locked myself in and saw him just standing in the doorway of the warehouse, watching me, still, with a machete in his hand. I drove out of there like a bat out of hell, heart racing, and went straight to the police. Turned out, the guy was known to them, had a rap sheet, and was holed up in those buildings. He was a violent guy, they said, been known to do bad things to people. He hadn't murdered anybody yet that they had known about. Who knows, though? If I had stuck around, hell, I might have been the first. Learned my lesson that day. No amount of free stuff is worth ignoring that tiny voice in your head telling you to get the hell out of a situation. Trust your gut. It might just save your hide one day. Thanks for tuning into another episode from the Alley of Nightmares. If you enjoyed the video, please like it, subscribe, and share with all your friends. Until next time,